They told you there were schools to shape your future, that the world of education was about learning, growth, and safety. But what if I told you there is another kind of school, one you were never meant to see, never meant to name, a place where the very concepts of good and evil are sharpened into weapons? Imagine walking through iron gates, not into a classroom, but into a crucible of power, where morality itself is no longer what you thought it was, where the labels of hero and villain are not accidents of destiny, but deliberate assignments, manipulated by unseen hands. This is not fantasy. This is not fiction. This is the hidden architecture behind every system that claims to raise you into a man, to guide you toward a role in society. They dress it in fairy tales, in myths, in children's stories about heroes and monsters. But behind those stories lies the oldest form of control, dividing souls into categories, sealing fates before a man even knows his own strength. The School for Good and Evil is not just a story. It is an encoded mirror of the world you live in right now. Kings and priests had their own versions of it. Governments, churches, corporations, they build their classrooms the same way. Some are taught obedience, to smile, to bend the knee, to sacrifice themselves for virtue. Others are taught cunning, domination, and shadow work, trained as predators, while the rest remain prey. The most dangerous truth? Both roles are engineered. Both roles are illusions. Tonight, you step into that forbidden school with me. But I warn you, once you enter, you cannot return unchanged. You will not be able to look at history, power, or even your own reflection in the same way again. Because once you see how the curriculum of good and evil was designed, you'll understand that your entire life has been a test you didn't know you were taking, with consequences you never agreed to. You feel that unease in your stomach right now? That's not fear. That's recognition. You already know, deep down, that the world was never divided fairly, never drawn in truth. You've always suspected there was a hidden lesson plan beneath reality itself. And now, the gates are opening. Step inside. You've entered the gates. The air is heavy here, thick with the weight of centuries. The walls are carved with names you'll never read in textbooks, names erased because they reveal a truth too sharp for the masses to hold. Every empire, every kingdom, every institution had its own school for good and evil. Think of ancient Egypt. They didn't just build pyramids. They built hierarchies of the soul. Priests taught the people that obedience, sacrifice, and servitude were good. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, initiates studied forbidden texts, spells of power, codes of kingship, rituals that allowed a few to dominate the many. To the sheep, morality was submission. To the shepherds, morality was manipulation. Two curriculums, two fates. The Romans perfected it. Citizens were told that loyalty to Rome, dying for the empire, was the highest virtue. But in the Senate, men studied deception, propaganda, and spectacle. Bread and circuses for the masses, poison and daggers for their rivals. Again, two paths. The good citizen who served, and the evil elite who ruled. But the twist? Both were products of the same system. Both were graduates of the same school. Even the medieval church followed the pattern. For the peasants, sermons of humility, obedience, suffering for salvation. For the higher orders, secret councils, political machinations, indulgences bought and sold like currency. Light for the flock, darkness for the shepherds, and always, always, the illusion that these roles were chosen by God, by fate, by destiny. Do you see the pattern now? Good and evil are not opposites. They are assignments. They are the curriculum given to you at birth, whispered in your ears by parents, teachers, leaders, priests. You were never free to define them for yourself. You were handed a script. You were told whether you were a hero or a villain before you had a chance to choose. And the men who designed this school, they knew something you were never meant to know. Both sides of the game answer to the same masters. This is the school for good and evil, not a fairy tale, a blueprint. And right now, you are beginning to recognize the architecture. You've been a student your whole life. The question is, were you placed in the classroom of obedience or the classroom of power? Look around you. The school never closed. It simply changed its mask. Today, the classrooms of good and evil aren't hidden in temples or cloisters. They're everywhere. The school system you grew up in, that was the first gate. From the moment you sat at that tiny desk, they began shaping you. Not to think, not to question, but to obey. Sit still, raise your hand, memorize, regurgitate, forget. You weren't being educated. You were being conditioned, trained to believe that good means compliance, following orders, pleasing authority. If you colored inside the lines, if you repeated the answers, you were rewarded. If you resisted, if you questioned, if you refused, you were punished. And yet, while you were drilled into submission, another class was being taught a different curriculum. The children of wealth, of power, of legacy. Their lessons were not obedience, but command. They learned confidence, negotiation, manipulation, networking. They learned how to bend rules, not follow them. Their textbooks were case studies in control. Their teachers were mentors in influence. And just like in the old empires, both paths were part of the same design. Media continued the work. Television, films, stories. They glorify the obedient hero, the sacrificial lamb, the man who lays down his life for a cause he doesn't even understand. At the same time, they demonize the man who breaks free, who seeks power, who challenges the order. Notice the trick. The villain is always powerful, seductive, charismatic. But he is framed as evil, so you learn to fear your own potential. You learn to associate strength with corruption and weakness with virtue. Government seals the lesson. You are told laws exist for order, for justice. Yet the lawmakers exempt themselves. The enforcers turn blind eyes when power is threatened, and corruption festers in plain sight. They smile while they tell you that obedience is freedom and dissent is treason. They tell you to be a good citizen. They warn you against evil forces. But behind the curtains, both are written into the same play. This is the modern school for good and evil. Classrooms, screens, pulpits, podiums. You walk its halls every day without realizing. The roles are still being assigned, and if you've ever wondered why you feel chained, why the world feels rigged, it's because the script was never yours to begin with. You've been told who you are since before you could speak, not by accident, not by love, but by design. The school for good and evil is not just a building or an institution. It is a program running inside your mind, shaping your identity from birth. Think back. What were you told it meant to be a good man? Be polite. Be patient. Don't raise your voice. Work hard. Sacrifice for others. Put everyone before yourself. And if you suffered in silence, if you swallowed your anger, your hunger, your will, you were praised. They called you virtuous. They called you noble. They called you good. Now contrast that with what you were told about the bad man. He was selfish. He was ambitious. He was ruthless. He took what he wanted. He broke rules. He didn't wait for permission. And so you were warned to avoid him, to fear him, to never become him. But deep down, you noticed something they didn't want you to see. The bad men moved the world. They built empires. They commanded respect. They did not ask. They took. And the very system that condemned them still bent the knee when they entered the room. Do you see the trap? The school for good and evil doesn't just separate society. It separates you from yourself. It takes your strength, your drive, your hunger, and brands them as dangerous. It takes your obedience, your submission, your restraint, and brands them as holy. It splits your soul in two, then convinces you that only one half is acceptable. But here is the forbidden truth. A man who only plays the good role becomes a slave. A man who only plays the evil role becomes a tyrant. And the men who rule you? They learned to balance both. They understood that true power comes not from rejecting one side of yourself, but from mastering both. You were never meant to know this. You were meant to stay blind, trapped in your assigned role, believing that self-denial is strength. But I am telling you now, your identity has been engineered. Your masculinity has been caged. Your power has been divided. And until you reclaim both sides of yourself, you will never escape the school. Ritual, ceremony, tradition, words that sound innocent, even beautiful. But beneath them lies one of the most powerful weapons of control ever devised. A man's role is not just spoken into him. It is ritualized into his bones. From childhood to adulthood, the school for good and evil carves your identity with ceremonies you never questioned. Think of the first classroom, the Pledge of Allegiance, standing in neat rows, hand over your heart, repeating words you didn't understand. That was no simple recitation. It was initiation, a ritual of obedience. You were binding yourself to a flag, to authority, before you even knew what authority meant. And when you obeyed, you were praised as good. Religion adds its ceremonies, baptisms, confirmations, bar mitzvahs, confessions, each one shaping your soul in the image of an institution. You are told what is pure, what is sinful, what is acceptable. You kneel, you bow, you repeat after the priest. Every motion is a lesson, every ritual a reinforcement. And if you ever felt shame in your gut during those rituals, it wasn't random. It was the chains tightening around your spirit. Then comes the school graduation. Cap, gown, diploma. It feels like freedom, like achievement. But look closer. It is another ritual, another moment where the system hands you your identity. They say, you are now ready to serve, not to lead, not to build, to serve. The mask of good is placed firmly on your face, and the man who resists, he is shamed, ridiculed, labeled as a failure, a dropout, a villain. Even marriage carries the same stamp. The vows, the ceremony, the endless traditions designed to tie you not just to a woman, but to the laws, the taxes, the courts of the state. They call it sacred. But ask yourself, who benefits from the binding? Who profits from the signatures, the contracts, the penalties? You think it's about love. No, it's about control. Do you see it now? Every major turning point in your life has been branded with ritual. Not random, not harmless. Rituals are how the school for good and evil ensures loyalty, conformity, identity. You didn't just live through them. You were shaped by them. And unless you strip them of their power, they will define you forever. Every culture has its myths. Every child grows up on stories. And you were told they were harmless. Bedtime tales, fables, movies, heroes to admire, villains to fear. But what if I told you those stories were not entertainment at all, but lessons? Lessons written by the architects of the school for good and evil, designed to carve your imagination into a prison. Think of the fairy tales. The prince who is noble, selfless, pure of heart, always rewarded for his sacrifice. The villain who is cunning, ambitious, powerful, always destroyed for his hunger. As a child, you absorbed these roles not as fiction, but as truth. Without knowing it, you were taught to fear ambition, to distrust your hunger, to despise your own shadow. At the same time, you were taught to worship self-denial, to see obedience as virtue, to see weakness as holiness. That is not storytelling. That is indoctrination. The same formula lives in your modern myths, Hollywood blockbusters, superhero franchises. The pattern never changes. The good man gives himself away, throws himself into the fire, bends to the system. He fights not for himself, but for the collective. He dies to save the many. And the evil man? He refuses to kneel. He seeks dominion. He has vision, will, and power. And though part of you feels drawn to him, though part of you recognizes yourself in him, the story punishes him. He is defeated, mocked, cast down. The lesson is clear. Do not follow that path. Do not step out of line. Even your news, your politics, your national stories follow the script. Leaders brand themselves as champions of the good, fighting the evil enemies abroad or within. Wars are packaged as fairy tales. Policies are framed as battles of light versus dark. And while you watch the spectacle, while you argue over heroes and villains, the architects sit above both sides. They know the truth, good and evil costumes, assigned for the performance. And you are the audience they need to believe. Now ask yourself, how many of your decisions, your beliefs, your sacrifices came not from reason, but from stories planted in you since childhood? How much of your life is not your own, but a script you were handed before you could read? Stories are not innocent. Stories are rituals, and every ritual is a chain. What if I told you the school doesn't just control your beliefs? It rewires your mind. This isn't only about stories or rituals or ceremonies. It's about conditioning. The architects of the school for good and evil discovered long ago that the human brain can be programmed like a machine, through reward, punishment, and repetition, and that programming stays with you for life. Think back to childhood. Every time you obeyed, you were rewarded. A smile, a gold star, a pat on the head. Every time you disobeyed, you were punished. Detention, shame, disappointment. These weren't random consequences. They were signals, burning pathways into your brain. Over time, the pattern became automatic. Compliance equals safety. Rebellion equals pain. Without realizing it, you began to crave approval, to avoid punishment. You began to self-police. That is the brilliance of the system. They don't need guards if the prisoner locks the cell from the inside. Psychologists call it operant conditioning. The ancients called it ritual. Today, it's neuroscience, and it runs deeper than you think. Traumas, moments of humiliation, rejection, loss, become anchors, cementing the lesson. You remember the sting of being laughed at in class, the shame of failure, the crushing silence of disapproval. Those wounds never healed. They became the bars of your cage. And every time you face risk, ambition, or hunger, those old signals flare up again. Danger, danger, danger. Stay small. Stay quiet. Stay good. Meanwhile, those placed on the other path, the children of power, were conditioned differently. Their risks were rewarded. Their defiance was celebrated. Their ambition was nurtured. They were trained to crave power the way you were trained to fear it. Two minds, two programs running in parallel, and both serving the same machine. Do you see how deep this goes? Your morality isn't just a belief. It's a reflex engineered into you by repetition, trauma, and manipulation. You don't choose to obey. You flinch toward obedience because your brain was rewired to do so. And unless you tear out the program, unless you strip it down to the roots, you will keep living as a student in their school. This is not education. This is control. This is psychological engineering, and it is the reason why most men will die in chains without ever knowing they were slaves. You are not the only one being programmed. The school for good and evil doesn't stop at the individual. It scales upward, turning entire societies into obedient classrooms. And the method is the same: conditioning. But at the collective level, the tools are sharper, the stakes are higher, and the effects are devastating. Think of war. Nothing reprograms a population faster than blood and fire. In times of war, leaders frame themselves as guardians of the good, defenders of innocence, civilization, freedom. The enemy is painted as evil incarnate, barbaric, monstrous, inhuman. And as the bombs fall, as bodies burn, a new lesson is carved into the mind of the masses. Obedience is survival. Dissent is treason. In the smoke of war, morality itself is weaponized. You are not asked to question. You are commanded to kneel. Consider terror. A single act of violence amplified through media can paralyze millions. A bomb, a shooting, a tragedy, replayed again and again until the image is burned into your skull. The fear becomes ritual. You learn to accept new laws, new restrictions, new surveillance. And though you don't realize it, you've been conditioned. Fear becomes obedience. Anxiety becomes loyalty. You hand over your freedom in exchange for the illusion of safety. Even entertainment serves the mass ritual. Public ceremonies, inaugurations, sports events, parades, all designed to unite millions under the same symbols, the same chants, the same illusions of belonging. You think you are celebrating. In truth, you are rehearsing obedience. The crowd becomes the classroom. The anthem becomes the lesson. The roar of the stadium becomes the chain. And then there is shame. Whole populations are taught to despise their history, their ancestors, their culture, to feel guilt for things they never did, sins they never committed. Shame is one of the strongest chains. A man who hates his own bloodline, his own culture, his own story, will never rise. He will kneel. He will call himself good for kneeling. And those who refuse, they are cast as evil, outcasts in their own land. This is collective programming, ritualized trauma, engineered memory. It is how empires last, how rulers turn nations into classrooms, and how the architects of the school for good and evil keep entire civilizations blind to their chains. You've been told that power is divided, that governments, corporations, and religions stand in opposition, fighting for different values, different visions of the world. But look closer. Strip away the costumes. Beneath the banners and slogans, they all serve the same master, the curriculum of control. Governments rule by law. They claim authority through elections, constitutions, parliaments, and flags. But their laws do not bind equally. The citizen is shackled. The rulers are exempt. Justice bends to wealth, to influence, to bloodlines. And yet, the illusion of fairness keeps the masses compliant. Government is not your guardian. It is your classroom. Teaching obedience through fear of punishment, through the promise of protection. Corporations rule by desire. They shape your hunger, your dreams, your very sense of self. They sell you what to want, who to be, how to live. You think you choose, but your choices were written into ads, campaigns, and algorithms long before you reached for your wallet. The corporation is not your servant. It is your classroom, teaching consumption as virtue, dependence as happiness, addiction as identity. Religion rules by guilt. It binds not just your actions, but your thoughts, your soul, your eternity. It tells you that suffering is noble, that desire is sin, that obedience to its rituals is salvation, and if you resist, eternal damnation. Fear so deep it survives death. Religion is not your sanctuary. It is your classroom, teaching submission to unseen masters, convincing you that kneeling is sacred. 3 powers, 3 masks, 3 curriculums, and yet, when you follow the money, when you follow the bloodlines, when you follow the influence, you find the same hands holding the chalk. Governments borrow from corporations. Corporations lobby governments. Both use religion to sanctify their actions, to keep the masses quiet. They appear to fight. They appear to compete. But the conflict is theater. It is the stage play of good and evil. The truth is simpler and darker. These institutions are not enemies. They are departments of the same school. Different classrooms, same architects, and the lesson is always the same. Obey, consume, kneel, divide. You were never meant to see it. But once you do, the illusion shatters, and behind it, only one truth remains. The school for good and evil is not a story. It is the world you live in. Every school has teachers. The school for good and evil is no different. But these teachers do not stand at chalkboards. They do not wear robes or uniforms. They wear crowns. They wear suits. They wear masks of piety. And for centuries, they have hidden themselves behind the illusion of institutions while quietly shaping the lessons that rule the world. Who are they? Bloodlines that stretch back through history. Dynasties that never lose power, only change their names. Families that sit behind thrones, funding wars, profiting from both sides. They are the ones who decide who is cast as good and who is labeled evil. Kings fall. Presidents are replaced. Corporations rise and collapse. But the teachers remain. The lesson never changes. Some call them secret societies. And yes, through symbols, lodges, and networks, they transmit forbidden knowledge to their initiates. Knowledge of psychology, persuasion, control. Knowledge of how to use ritual, myth, and fear to bind entire nations. They understand what you were never meant to know. Morality is a tool, not a truth. They write the script of good and evil, not to follow it, but to use it. Others call them elites, bankers who fund wars while preaching peace, media barons who shape narratives while claiming neutrality, religious leaders who thunder about virtue while cloaking corruption. They are not divided. They are not enemies. They are instructors in the same hidden classroom, playing roles in a curriculum designed to keep you blind. And if you think this is only modern, think again. Ancient priesthoods guarded this same knowledge. Pharaohs and high priests, emperors and pontiffs. They all understood the mechanics of control. They all split society into good and evil, into heroes and villains, saints and sinners. The costumes change, the names change, the lesson does not. Here is the forbidden truth. Histon Rai is not a story of nations rising and falling. It is a story of the same hidden teachers, wearing new masks, teaching the same curriculum to new generations of slaves. They are the ones who graduate students of power while damning the rest to obedience. They are the ones who guard the gates of the school for good and evil. And until you see them clearly, you will always be their pupil. The teachers of the school for good and evil do not speak to you directly. They don't need to. They communicate through symbols. Symbols carved into stone, stitched into flags, hidden in logos, flashed across screens. They call it art, tradition, branding. But what it really is language. A language of power you were never taught to read. Every empire has carried its symbols. The eagle of Rome, the cross of Christendom, the eye in the pyramid, the double-headed serpent, each one a mark of authority, a reminder that your world is already claimed. They are not decorations. They are contracts. When you salute the flag, kneel before the cross, or use the currency in your pocket, you are unconsciously affirming their rule. Symbols bypass the rational mind. They speak directly to the subconscious. You don't think about them. You obey them. Language works the same way. Words are not neutral. Words are weapons. Why do you think the system labels dissenters as terrorists, rebels as traitors, and obedience as patriotism? Why do they call wars peacekeeping missions, slavery employment, propaganda, news? Because they know if they control the language, they control the thought. You cannot fight what you cannot name. Even corporate logos follow the ritual. Look at them closely. Circles, eyes, flames, triangles. Ancient sigils repackaged as brands. They mark territory, the way empires marked cities, with statues and obelisks. You think you're choosing between companies, between products. In truth, you are choosing between different classrooms in the same school. Their symbols brand you long before you realize you've been claimed. And here is the most disturbing part. Once you learn to see the symbols, you cannot unsee them. They are everywhere. Cathedrals, government buildings, movie posters, even children's cartoons. They've always been there, whispering to your subconscious, shaping your loyalties, branding your imagination. You've walked through a world of codes without ever knowing you were inside the script. This is how the teachers of the school for good and evil maintain their grip, not through open commands, but through symbols and language that sculpt your reality while you sleep. And once you awaken to their presence, you realize the truth. Every corner of your world has been marked. Every word you speak carries their spell. And until you reclaim your language, until you strip the power from their symbols, you remain their student. The school does not only chain your mind, it chains your flesh. Because the body, your hunger, your desire, your fear of death, is the most ancient weapon of control. And the teachers of the school for good and evil have always known this. If you can control a man's body, you own his soul. Start with hunger. Entire civilizations have been ruled not by law, but by bread. Food becomes currency. Scarcity becomes obedience. Ancient kings hoarded grain, releasing it only when the people bowed. Modern rulers use the same tactic. Subsidies, prices, shortages engineered to keep populations anxious, dependent, obedient. A man who fears starvation cannot rebel. He is too busy surviving. Hunger is the leash. Now think of sexuality. Every instinct you were born with has been branded. Desire was labeled as sin, passion as shame, masculine hunger as danger. Entire religions have turned the most natural force in your body into a battlefield of guilt. If you obeyed, you were told you were pure. If you resisted, you were corrupted. Do you see it? Another classroom, another division of souls. They did not want you to master your desire. They wanted you to fear it. Because a man afraid of his own body will never rise against those who enslave it. Health itself has been weaponized. Fear of disease, fear of aging, fear of death. Institutions promise healing, safety, salvation, but always at a price, always with obedience attached. Ancient priests demanded sacrifices for health. Modern systems demand compliance with authority, endless consumption of products, submission to institutions. And though the methods have evolved, the lesson has not. Trust us with your body, or you will suffer. And finally, death. The greatest weapon of all. From birth, you are taught that your end will either damn you or save you, depending on obedience. Kneel, and you are promised paradise. Resist, and you are promised hell. What greater chain could exist than the fear of eternal punishment? And what greater illusion than the promise of eternal reward for silence, submission, suffering? The truth is simple, brutal, undeniable. Your body has been turned into a classroom. Hunger, sex, health, death. Each one a lesson in obedience. And until you reclaim your flesh, until you master the instincts they've branded as dangerous, you remain not a man, but a student in their school. The most perfect prison is the one you cannot see, and the most powerful chain of the school for good and evil is not law, not money, not fear. It is time itself. You believe your days belong to you, that your hours are your own. But look closer. Every tick of the clock, every square on the calendar has been written by hands you will never meet. Consider the calendar. Who decided the year begins in January? Who divided your life into months, weeks, workdays, weekends? You did not choose this. You inherited it. Ancient emperors carved time into the shape of their empires. Kings renamed months after themselves. Priests decided when years began, when they ended, when you should fast, when you should feast. The calendar is not a neutral tool. It is a leash, dividing your life into cages of obligation. The clock tightens the grip. Think of the school bell. Think of the work whistle. From childhood, you were trained to move at the sound of a bell, to rise, to sit, to change tasks, not when you felt ready, but when the system demanded it. By the time you became a man, you no longer needed the bell. The habit was already inside you. You wake, you work, you rest, you consume, all by the invisible command of numbers on a clock face. You don't own your hours. They own you. And then there are holidays, festivals of obedience, disguised as celebrations, days when you are told to worship the state, to remember its victories, to honor its heroes, to consume its products. You gather with millions, performing rituals that reinforce the same symbols, the same myths. These holidays feel joyous, but they are chains. They mark your life, year after year, in rhythms not chosen by your soul, but imposed by the architects of the school. Here lies the forbidden truth. Time is the cage you never questioned. You are not free. You are scheduled. Every moment of your life has been divided. Na'an, Ahmed, claimed. Even your birthday, the day you call your own, is only another entry in their calendar, another ritualized reminder that you belong to their system. Until you reclaim your time, until you decide your own rhythm, you remain a student in their school, because a man who does not own his hours cannot own his life. What is freedom if every choice has already been written for you? This is the cruel genius of the school for good and evil. It does not need to chain your body if it can chain your options. It does not need to silence you if it can script the words you will speak. You believe you are free. But freedom built on engineered choices is not freedom. It is theater. Look at politics. Red or blue, left or right, Democrat or Republican. Two banners, two sides, two masks. But trace the money, the bloodlines, the donors, the corporate ties, and you find the same hands funding both. You rage against one party, celebrate the other. But both march toward the same wars, the same debts, the same surveillance, the same consolidation of power. You think you chose. You didn't. You were given two doors that lead to the same room. Look at the market. Do you believe you are free because you can choose between brands, between logos, between products lined up on a shelf? These corporations are tied together in webs of ownership so tight you could burn every logo in your closet and still be wearing the same company's chains. They don't care which shirt you buy, which drink you sip, which phone you use, as long as you keep consuming. You think you chose. You didn't. They chose for you. Even morality itself is reduced to false choice. Are you a good man who obeys, or an evil man who resists? Both roles were scripted. Both roles serve the same play. The obedient become pawns. The rebels become villains. And while you fight over labels, the architects of the school remain untouched. Hidden, always above, always pulling the strings. Here lies the forbidden truth. The system does not fear your vote. It does not fear your purchase. It does not fear your rebellion, because all of these have already been accounted for. All paths are contained within the curriculum. What it fears is the man who steps outside the script altogether. The man who refuses to choose between good and evil, between the left hand and the right. That man is no longer a student. He is free. What happens to a man when his soul is divided? When his choices are illusions? When his morality is scripted? When his instincts are branded as dangerous? He does not live. He performs. He walks through life wearing masks, assigned by others, never touching the core of who he is. This is the silent cost of the school for good and evil. Men who are alive, yet never truly awake. Look into the eyes of the average man. Do you see fire there? Or do you see hesitation? Fear of stepping out of line. Fear of what others will think. Fear of wanting too much, desiring too deeply, hungering too openly. The system calls this humility. But it is not humility. It is castration of the spirit. A man taught to kneel calls it virtue because he has forgotten the taste of standing. And what of the other mask? The evil role. The man who embraces his hunger without direction, without discipline, without truth. He may rise for a time. He may take what he wants. burn his way through the world. But he is still a prisoner, because his rebellion was scripted too. He has been taught to consume without purpose, to dominate without mastery, to chase shadows of power instead of the real thing. He believes he is free, but he is just as trapped as the obedient man, only in a darker cell. The cost is not just external, it is internal. Men feel the fracture inside. They feel torn between who they are and who they are allowed to be. This fracture becomes depression, anxiety, rage turned inward. It becomes addiction, escapism, numbness. The man drinks not because he is weak, but because he is divided. He consumes not because he is greedy, but because he is starving for the parts of himself he was forced to bury. And so, the school wins, because divided men cannot rise, divided men cannot build, divided men cannot claim power. They stumble through life half asleep, doubting themselves, ashamed of themselves, afraid of themselves. This is not weakness. This is design. The architects wanted you hollow. They wanted you ashamed, because a man who hates himself will never threaten those who rule him. The school for good and evil does not just control society. It controls the man's reflection in the mirror. And until you heal that fracture, you remain not a man, but a mask. You have seen the cages now, the rituals, the stories, the conditioning, the symbols. You know that your choices have been engineered, your instincts branded, your time stolen, your soul divided, and maybe you feel the weight of it pressing down on your chest. That heaviness is not despair. It is the pressure of awakening. Because the truth is brutal. Once you see the school for what it is, you can never return to ignorance. You cannot unknow the chains. You cannot go back to sleep. But here is the forbidden truth they never wanted you to hear. The school is not unbreakable. The curriculum is not absolute, and the men who rule it are not gods. They are architects, yes, but architects build with illusions. They rely on obedience, on your blindness, on your willingness to accept the script. Once you withdraw that obedience, once you strip away the mask of good and evil, the structure begins to crack. Understand this. You are not only a student, you are also a potential teacher, a potential architect of your own fate. The reason they worked so hard to chain you was because they feared what you could become if you ever learned the forbidden lessons. They feared the man who would not choose between obedience and rebellion, but instead would claim both sides of himself and master them. That man cannot be controlled. That man cannot be divided. That man cannot be ruled. The descent you are on is not just about knowledge. It is about transformation. Every chain you see, every lie you uncover, every ritual you decode, these are not just weapons against you. They are blueprints for power. The same tools they use to enslave you can be turned into tools of liberation if you have the will to wield them. But beware, this path is not for the faint. It will cost you the comfort of illusions, the safety of conformity, the ease of belonging. It will demand a death, not of your body, but of the false self you were taught to be. The good mask, the evil mask, both must burn. Only then does the man beneath emerge. You have stepped through the gates of the school. You have walked its halls. Now the question is this: will you graduate into freedom, or remain a student until the end of your days? There is a curriculum within the curriculum, a hidden set of lessons never taught to the masses, whispered only in the chambers of kings, priests, bankers, and generals. These are the lessons of power itself, the forbidden curriculum. And the first of these lessons is silence. Not ignorance, not absence, but weaponized silence. Understand this. What you know is not what destroys you. What you don't know does. That is why secrecy is the foundation of every empire. The school teaches you stories, fairy tales, myths of good and evil, heroes and villains. Meanwhile, the architects keep the real knowledge sealed behind doors you will never be allowed to open. Knowledge of finance, knowledge of psychology, knowledge of ritual, knowledge of war. These are the true weapons, and they were never meant for your hands. This is why secret societies have always existed, from the mystery schools of Egypt to the lodges of Europe, to the quiet, unspoken alliances of corporations today. Their symbols litter our cities, but their meanings are buried. Their rituals echo through history, but their purposes are hidden. They move in silence, because silence is control. If the masses cannot see the strings, they will believe the puppet moves on its own. And silence is not just about hiding truth. It is about punishing those who reveal it. Whistleblowers are exiled, heretics burned, rebels erased from history. The cost of breaking the silence is death, literal or symbolic. Which is why so many remain quiet. Which is why you have been quiet. Not because you didn't sense the lies, but because you feared the price of speaking. But here lies the inversion. What they fear most is not the silence itself, but the man who breaks it. A single truth, spoken with fire, can unravel centuries of lies. This is why they fight so hard to drown voices, to ridicule, to censor, to erase. Because power cannot withstand exposure. And yet, exposure requires courage. The kind of courage the school spends your entire life training out of you. The first forbidden lesson is this. Silence is the weapon of the rulers, but it can also be the weapon of the free. Keep your truths hidden until the right moment. Guard them like fire, and when you unleash them, let them burn. Symbols. You see them every day. On flags, on money, on buildings, on screens. They are etched into architecture, sewn into clothing, carved into monuments. And yet, you barely notice them. You treat them as decoration. But to the architects of the school, symbols are not decoration. They are weapons. They are the invisible ink of control. Understand this. Words fade, books burn, stories change, but symbols endure. A single image can outlast centuries, crossing languages, cultures, even religions. The serpent, the eye, the pyramid, the star, the circle. These are not random marks. They are sigils, keys designed to bypass your logic and speak directly to your subconscious. You think you ignore them, but your deeper mind absorbs them, shapes itself around them, reacts to them without permission. Consider the dollar bill. You hold it, you spend it, you chase it. But do you ever ask why it carries an unfinished pyramid, crowned with a radiant eye? That is not banking. That is not economics. That is initiation. Every transaction you make is stamped with a ritual symbol you do not understand. Consider your nation's flags, military badges, corporate logos, circles within circles, suns, wings, serpents. They tell stories in silence, stories you are not invited to hear. And the greatest trick? The school pretends these symbols mean nothing. They call them coincidence, design, branding. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, The same symbols are used in rituals, initiations, and oaths of secrecy. The masses wave the flag without knowing the star they salute was once carved into the temples of Babylon. They wear logos without knowing those logos echo sigils of ancient cults. They bow before crosses, crescents, wheels, never realizing they are kneeling before the same recurring archetypes that have ruled men for thousands of years. This is the second forbidden lesson. Symbols are not just marks. They are operating systems for the human mind, and once installed, they dictate behavior without you ever knowing. The architects do not care if you understand. They care only that you obey the pull of the symbol, that you salute, that you kneel, that you consume, that you fight, all while believing you are acting freely. But here is the secret they never wanted you to learn. Once you see the symbol, once you name it, it begins to lose its hold. Because a spell is broken the moment the victim recognizes it as a spell. Stories are the bloodstream of civilization. Every law you obey, every belief you hold, every identity you claim is woven from a story. Nations are stories. Religions are stories. Economies are stories. Even the idea of you, your name, your role, your value, is a story. But here is the forbidden truth. Most of these stories are not yours. They were written for you, crafted, refined, and passed down like chains disguised as heritage. The School for Good and Evil understands that men will not die for facts. They will not bleed for logic, but they will kill, and they will die, for stories, for the idea of a flag, for the myth of a chosen people, for the illusion of progress. The architects know that if they can control the story, they never need to control the man, because the man will control himself in service of the story. Look at history. How many wars were fought, not over truth, but over myth? Crusades, revolutions, conquests, each justified by a tale of destiny, honor, righteousness. And yet, peel back the story, and what do you find? Resources stolen, territories seized, bloodlines expanded. The story was the mask. The plunder was the reality. Even today, the pattern repeats. You are told stories of democracy, freedom, prosperity. But watch closely. The same elites remain in power. The same families control the wealth. The same machinery of surveillance tightens its grip. The story says you are free. The reality is you are managed. The story says you are advancing. The reality is you are consuming, distracted, and decaying. And myths do not die easily. Once embedded, they become sacred. To question them is to invite exile, ridicule, even death. This is why the architects elevate their stories to the level of religion. They crown them with symbols, baptize them with rituals, seal them with fear, so that even when the story is false, it feels holy. Here is the forbidden lesson. He who writes the story rules the world, because men do not live in facts. They live in narratives. And until you reclaim the pen, you are not a man of power. You are a character in someone else's script. Time is the stage upon which all human life unfolds. But the stage is not neutral. It is curated, constructed, and edited. The architects of the school know this better than anyone. That is why they do not just control the present. They control the past. Because whoever owns the past owns the future. Think about what you were taught as history. Neatly packaged dates. Wars reduced to victories and defeats. Heroes elevated. Villains demonized. Entire peoples erased with the stroke of a textbook. Do you really believe it was an accident that you learned some names while others vanished into silence? Do you think it was chance that you were given simplified myths instead of raw, conflicting truths? No. It was design. Empires have always rewritten themselves into glory. Rulers erect monuments, not to honor truth, but to cement illusion. They burn libraries. They silence chroniclers. They bury inconvenient ruins beneath new temples. Even your calendar, the way you mark days, months, years, is an artifact of conquest, a system forced upon the world by men who understood that to change the rhythm of time itself is to enslave generations. The School for Good and Evil thrives on this. By teaching you a curated past, they set the boundaries of what you think is possible in the present. If you believe freedom has always been granted from above, you will never believe you can seize it yourself. If you believe men have always been divided into good and evil, you will never imagine a life beyond the split. If you believe progress is inevitable, you will never question whether you are walking forward or in circles. And notice this: history does not just forget, it selectively forgets. The wisdom of indigenous tribes, the libraries of Alexandria, the inventions suppressed because they threatened control, the rebellions erased so you never learned that resistance was possible. The very bones of ancient civilizations lie beneath your feet, but you are trained to walk past them as if they were meaningless dust. Here is the forbidden lesson. Time is not a river, it is a weapon, and the men who hold it decide who you are, where you come from, and where you think you are going. Until you reclaim memory, until you pierce through the edits, the silences, the erasures, you are not living in history. You are living in someone's script of it, ritual. You think of it as religion, as superstition, as old forgotten ceremonies. But you are wrong. Ritual is everywhere. It is in the way you rise each morning to the sound of an alarm, the Pledge of Allegiance spoken in unison, the bowing of heads before a meal, the standing ovation in a theater, the corporate slogans chanted in meetings. You call these habits, traditions, routines, but to the architects of the school, they are ritual, the most effective form of control. Understand this: ritual bypasses thought. When repeated, when tied to emotion, rhythm, or community, ritual imprints itself directly into the subconscious. You no longer ask why you are doing it. You simply do it. And every ritual reinforces the story, the symbol, the silence you have already been given. Ritual is the cement that hardens the architecture of control. Look deeper. Ancient kings demanded ritual sacrifice, not only to honor gods, but to condition their subjects to accept bloodshed as holy. Modern parades, national holidays, military salutes, all ritual. They do not exist for joy. They exist to bind individuals into one obedient mass. School bells ringing in strict intervals mimic factory whistles, training children to march to the rhythm of labor. Even funerals, framed as reverence for the dead, are rituals designed to remind the living of mortality, of the order of life, of obedience to fate. And then there is repetition. What is advertisement but ritualized repetition of symbols and stories? What is propaganda but ritualized storytelling, drilled until you stop questioning? The architects know that truth does not matter. Repetition matters. Say a lie enough times, and it feels more solid than stone. Repeat a gesture long enough, and it becomes sacred. This is why the School for Good and Evil trains you in ritual from childhood. Handshakes, oaths, pledges, recitations, awards, punishments, all designed to habituate you into obedience. You think you are free because you no longer recite the classroom pledge, but you have only graduated into new rituals: taxes, ballots, paychecks, contracts, screens lighting your face each night like the glow of a digital altar. Here is the forbidden lesson. Ritual is neither good nor evil. It is raw power. Used by rulers, it enslaves. Used by the awakened, it transforms. The difference lies in awareness. Do you kneel because you choose, or because you were trained to? Until you can answer that, you are not a man. You are an initiate who never graduated. There is a deeper level of control than silence, symbols, stories, or ritual. It is inversion. The deliberate flipping of truth into its opposite until you no longer just misunderstand the world. You defend the lie as if it were your very life. The architects know that men do not want chains. They want freedom. So the school teaches them this. Their chains are their freedom. Debt becomes opportunity. Slavery becomes work ethic. Surveillance becomes safety. War becomes peace. Every cage is painted as a sanctuary. Every prison described as protection. And men, desperate for meaning, swallow the lie whole. Look closely. You are told that endless labor will buy you security. But the more you work, the more they take. You are told democracy gives you power. Yet your choices are pre-selected, your voice drowned beneath corporate influence. You are told technology connects you. Yet the more you scroll, the more isolated you feel. Inversion is everywhere. The poison is sold as medicine. The blade is disguised as a cure. And once the inversion takes hold, the chains do not need guards. The slaves guard themselves. They ridicule the man who questions the system. They fight for the system that exploits them. They call it patriotism, loyalty, civic duty. In truth, it is programming. A school that taught them to embrace their bondage as virtue. Do you see the genius? Men are not just enslaved. They are turned into evangelists of their own enslavement. The man in debt urges others to borrow. The man under surveillance demands his neighbor comply. The worker stripped of freedom shames those who will not grind. Inversion turns victims into enforcers. It turns prisoners into wardens. This is why so many laugh when you try to awaken them. They are not just blind. They are inverted. Their identity is fused with their chains. To reject the system would be to reject themselves. That is, look around you. You see leaders come and go, elections rise and fall, CEOs retire, presidents pass away. You believe power shifts, but it does not. That is the illusion. The school built the stage so that the actors may change, but the script remains the same. The names alter, the faces shift, but the bloodlines, the true owners of the script, endure. You think history is a tale of chaos and chance. It is not. It is a tale of families, dynasties, houses that learned early that the only way to hold dominion over generations was not through talent or charisma, but through blood. They understood. While the masses scramble for bread, they will pass down empires. And so they marry strategically, they guard their heritage, they train their children in the secret curriculum, while your children are fed the public one. Why do you think the same last names echo through history? Why does wealth never disperse but always consolidates? Why do governments pretend to shift, yet always bow to the same financial dynasties, the same corporate interests, the same hidden councils? This is no accident. This is hierarchy, designed to appear natural. Even religion and royalty carried this logic. Divine right of kings, holy bloodlines, mythologies of chosen peoples, all stories crafted to protect the fact that a select few families carved the world into kingdoms and never truly surrendered them. Even today, the modern aristocracy does not wear crowns. They wear corporate titles, banking seats, philanthropic masks. But the principle is the same. Power is inherited, not earned. And this is where the school is at its most ruthless. While you are taught equality, they are taught lineage. While you are taught meritocracy, they are taught dynasty. While you are told that leadership comes from votes, they are told leadership comes from blood. and they obey. They do not crossbreed randomly. They desire, lust, hunger, ambition. The forces that built empires, toppled kings, and drove men across oceans. These instincts are not evil in themselves. They are primal, carved into your very biology. But the architects of the school learned early that if you cannot kill desire, you can redirect it. If you cannot silence hunger, you can feed it poison, disguised as pleasure. Understand this. Temptation is the most elegant form of control. A man forced into chains will fight. A man offered the pleasures of his weakness will kneel willingly. And so the school learned to give men exactly what destroys them. Food that fattens, drink that dulls, screens that distract, sex that consumes, wealth that enslaves. They turn every fire of the human spirit into a furnace that burns the man down from the inside. Look around you. The modern world is not an accident of convenience. It is a laboratory of temptation, endless stimulation, endless comfort, endless options, and yet endless emptiness. Because the architects understand this paradox. The more a man consumes, the weaker he becomes. The more he chases pleasure, the less he can endure hardship. And once a man cannot endure, he cannot rebel. Temptation has always been the weapon. Ancient kings used wine, feasts, and flesh to pacify the people. Empires used bread and circuses to keep citizens docile. Today, your bread is fast food. Your circus is digital entertainment. Your temple is consumerism. And the more you kneel at its altar, the more you believe you are free. When in truth, you are drugged. Do you see the trap? Men believe their desires are their own, but they are cultivated, engineered, and marketed with surgical precision. Every weakness you have is studied, predicted, and weaponized against you. Your biology is not yours anymore. It is theirs. Here is the forbidden lesson. The greatest prison is not made of walls. It is made of your appetites. The man who cannot master desire cannot master himself, and the man who cannot master himself is already mastered by another. This is why the architects need not chain every limb. They only need to enslave the instincts, because a man who loves his temptations will die defending the system that feeds them. You have walked through shadows. You have seen how silence was engineered, how stories were weaponized, how ritual carved obedience into the bones, how inversion turned chains into virtues, how bloodlines preserved power, and how desire was twisted into poison. All of this leads here, to the final teaching. The school for good and evil was never about good, never about evil. It was about this. Will you be mastered, or will you master yourself? Every trick, every lie, every inversion was designed to test this single truth. That most men will kneel, that most men will surrender, that most men will die slaves, smiling as they polish their chains. The architects know this. That is why they do not fear you, because they know you better than you know yourself. They know which button to press, which ritual to repeat, which temptation to feed. They know you will defend the system even as it drains you. They know that when the gates of the school close, you will not walk out. You will beg to stay inside. But here is the forbidden truth. The gates were never locked. They never needed to be. Because the only prison that holds you is the one in your mind. If you can break it, you are free. If you cannot, you remain a student of the school until death. And this is the lesson you were never supposed to hear. Good and evil were lies. What mattered was power. the power to command yourself when all others bend, the power to strip illusion from your eyes, even when the entire world demands you worship it, the power to walk out of the school and never look back. But here is the cost. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you awaken, you cannot return to the comfort of illusion. You will be hunted by those who remain asleep, hated by those still inverted, mocked by those still enslaved. Freedom is not the end of the story. Freedom is the beginning of war. So the question is not why. Either you understand. The question is whether you choose. Will you be another student, repeating the lessons until death? Or will you become the man the school fears, the one who walks away, carrying the forbidden knowledge in his hands, unchained, unbroken, unbowed? The choice has always been yours. The curriculum is finished. The gates stand open. Now walk, if you dare.